going to cover a pretty cool chapter today. But let's go to chapter 20 real quick. Now, I think the first couple are going to go pretty quick because they're just kind of stories that have been put in there. We'll kind of pull a few nuggets out of them, but I want to get to 22 is where I really want to, like I said, spend today. So let's read chapter 20. This is another very interesting story of Abraham. Let's just read it all because it's only 18 verses. Who would like to read that?
I can.
Go ahead.
Me?
Who wants to?
Who's doing it? Me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Now Abraham moved on from there onto the region of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed in Gerar. And there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, "You are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, 'She is my sister'? And didn't she also say, 'He is my brother'? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands." Then God said to him in a dream, "Yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I have kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray, he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all yours will die." Early the next morning, Abimelech summoned all of his officials, and when he told them all that had happened, they were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said, "What have you done to us? How have I wronged you that you have brought such great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that should not be done." And Abimelech asked Abraham, "What was your reason for doing this?" Abraham replied, "I said to myself, there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Because, besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God had me wander from my father's household, I said to her, 'This is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother.' Then Abimelech bought sheep and cattle and made all female slaves and gave them to Abraham. And he returned Sarah to his wife to him. And Abimelech said, 'My land is before you, live wherever you like.' To Sarah he said, 'I am giving your brother 1,000 shekels of silver. This is to cover the offense against you before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated.' Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his slave girls, so they could have children again. For the Lord had closed up every womb in Abimelech's household because of Abraham's wife Sarah."
Okay. So why is this story in here?
He didn't run from
Abraham
Pharaoh.
didn't change. The second time, he didn't change.
Yeah, so I mean, what does this say about Abraham and his faith? Slightly.
Not perfect.
Yeah. I mean, it shows that his faith did kind of come and go with God. And honestly, I like it because it really shows that even Abraham, and if we go to Hebrews where we get this whole faith chapter on Abraham and his mighty faith, even he fell. So these mighty men that God calls, they weren't perfect. God does not call the perfect. God uses us, right where we are, whatever situation that we're in. He never tells us to get better first and then come to me. Ever. And this shows us with Abraham with being who he is. Okay, and he's a patriarch. I mean, he's the father of many nations. We're going to get to a little bit more of that here in a little bit. What other things kind of jump out at you when
I
you're
think
reading
it's
this?
really interesting that God did recognize the king's ignorance. He's a just God. And yet the king still committed an offense. So Abraham had to pray for him. Even when there is sin committed in ignorance, it still requires atonement.
Absolutely. But again, he's just. He gave him an out. I kind of like how God intervened in this situation. Because he intervened in a couple of ways, but he came to him in a dream. That's very interesting to me. Does God do that today?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely he does. And if we really take a look, if you go do a Google search, I was going to show one here on the screen. We just don't have time. Just go do a Google search of how God is reaching the Muslim nation.
All dreams.
All dreams. You know, and that's the way God's going to do it. Jesus is appearing to them and converting them. So God still uses dreams.
Just a question: could the devil also appear to you in your dreams?
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't see why he probably couldn't do something, but I don't know that. There's no instance of that we could get of that.
It's called a nightmare. Well,
It's called a cell phone.
if we give Satan the ability to trigger dreams, then we're giving him the same ability that God has, and I don't think they're co-equals.
Yeah.
My dad has nightmares, and he's an unbeliever, and he's 87, and I'm curious if those nightmares that he's having over, are fate.
Or midnight Taco Bell.
Yeah. Makes you something he ate, not agreeing. But no, I mean,
Sorry about that.
I think if he gave him, like kind of what Mike said, if he gave him that option to do that, then he probably could do that. And sometimes God gives nightmares to people to kind of waken them up too. So maybe there's some opportunity there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna ask a tough question, because this goes back to John was saying, is that, what is it, let's say it wasn't Sarah, let's say it was somebody else, was it still a sin? And the issue is, the next question would be, I mean, you don't have the answers because this is kind of dumb. So the next question, I guess follow on, is that he obviously, when does it become a sin, type of thing, when he's,
Abraham, or are you talking Abimelech?
because he didn't know. I mean, was it a sin because it was Sarah? So my point is that when we look at sin, it's a transgression against God, whether you do it intentionally or not intentionally. Any transgression against God is still, it's like, an officer pulling you over going, did you know that it was a 40 mile an hour, you were driving 50? No, I did not. Oh, it's okay, I'll let you go, type of thing. That it's a transgression against God is the point, whether you know it or not.
Yeah.
But God is, which he said. And we need to be reminded of that, because there's things that we don't know or haven't thought about, or maybe we just, lazy at, we don't think about, are still sins too.
Isn't that the whole purpose of the law?
Yes.
To put that mirror before us
Yes.
and show us in our ignorance what our sin is?
Yeah, and I don't think this is the first time Abimelech had done this. This was normal for them. They were in a pagan area. This is the Philistine area. This was a normal practice. And the funny thing is like, God didn't once tell him no previously. So God is going to let you kind of wallow in your sin if that's kind of an area in who you want to worship to a certain point. But I think there will come a time when God will say and kind of waken you. And this was the time for Abimelech with Sarah, because Sarah was kind of chosen. So his hand of protection was over her, which then allowed Abimelech's eyes to be open to a degree. Because it's still questionable about whether Abimelech knew who he was talking to.
Yes.
Well, Abraham says it at the beginning there is no fear of God in this place. He was talking about the real God. They had gods.
They had gods. Abimelech could have been thinking this is just a God that he was talking to, because this is a dream. So whoever this Abraham's God is, you know what, he was at least smart enough to pay attention. As it was enough of a warning for him to go, I better listen to this. I'm not taking any chances here, because this is my legacy that's on the line. Because God says I'm going to completely just take care of it. And he's like, that's enough of a warning that now I'm going to pay attention.
So this was over a period of time, because it says in verse 18, for the Lord had closed the wombs of all the house of Amalek because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So this didn't happen like overnight. There's just always some period of time. So they obviously knew something was going on. And then we will read here in a little bit that it's kind of like, I like read this, it's kind of like Nebuchadnezzar type of thing. Nebuchadnezzar, he was quote unquote God, OG of course, but then he cries out to the one and only God, and people acknowledge him. And we read a little bit later that Amalek, they acknowledge there's something unique about this man. So we don't know, because it didn't go in a lot of history, but I kind of agree with you, because I did read one commentator that said on here that, he feared God. I'm going like, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I don't think he feared God. I think it was just a reaction because of what was going
That's
on.
what I think.
And what's interesting to me is how he approaches Abraham. He was like, why did you do this to me?
Yeah.
And what was Abraham's response?
Why did you
repent and
have
go fear God
old
and you-
grandma in your palace?
He was like,
You should have asked that.
sorry. You know?
My bad.
Yeah.
He said she really was my sister.
Yeah, I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you the whole truth here. You know, but God used the situation though, even to Abraham's benefit. Because Abraham through this whole time he's getting more wealthy, he's acquiring more goods, and even through this mirrors what happened with Pharaoh. Gives him servants, he gives him animals, gives him 1,000 silver, which was a lot of money during that time. And he even says, look, go wherever you want to go, stay in this land, just whatever. I just do not want, but I need you to do something for me. I need you to pray for me. And so Abraham's like, absolutely. He goes, I will pray for you. And then God opened up the wombs again.
So the two differences between Amalek and Pharaoh, Pharaoh said, get out of here. Amalek
He says, you can stay. Absolutely. That's the last thing I wrote down here. Is there anything else in here that I didn't cover?
Just a piece of trivia. In verse 7, Abraham is referred to as a prophet, and that's the first time in the Bible that anyone is called a prophet.
Absolutely. And I did skip over that on my notes. That's good.
She had to have been really, really beautiful to be, was she in her 90s, 80s, and they're still taking her.
That's a wife.
What kind of man is that? Having my goodness.
Yeah.
But they're-
having an old man in his palace.
When you're a hottie, you're a hottie.
That's good. Which verse is that?
That's down there in the notes,
Is that
the application?
That's gotta be the
Those
message.
days that might not have been the case.
I'm sorry.
Those days that might not have been the case.
That's what I was thinking.
Somebody comes into, like, she comes into, and he's got a harem with him. He just kind of takes over all the women because that's just part of what happened back then.
Well, and Abraham was no poor guy. He was
He's
also,
the king now.
he was rich.
That shows his wealth.
yeah, so there was also something for him to gain by taking over from him as well. So yeah, there's a lot going on. And then also another trivia, this is the first time Lord Adonai is used whenever he does this. So as we move along, we're actually seeing different names of God being used. So pay attention to those too.
One last question here. So on this right here, he does the same thing with, Amalek as he did with Pharaoh, but this is after he conquers the 5 kings, Sodom and Gomorrah. So there's still some fear in there. Either he felt, this goes back to your first point, is that his faith wasn't strong enough, either his 300 men plus wasn't enough, to go against Amalek or something there.
Something, yeah, absolutely. It's good.
Oh, so did Abraham go where the angels told, or where those angels told Lot to go? Is that how he ended up there with?
That's a good question. Yeah, why was Abraham moving around?
He was a nomad. I mean,
Yeah, he was a nomad, and it's believed, he didn't go because someone told him to go. It's believed that he was moving around because he had all these animals and people. And during that time, you had to go where the water was.
Or the grazing land.
Yeah, or land for them to graze on. So when you're a nomad like that, living in that area, you had to move around as weather patterns shifted or as whatever, or as, grass got eaten up, you had to move to another pasture. So yeah, he was definitely moving around. But at some point, which we're going to see here in a minute, he actually kind of plants himself. And this becomes a little tension between Abimelech and Abraham. Okay, so let's get into 21. I want to make it 22 today. And so finally we get to a prophecy fulfilled. Okay, so let's just read this very first 7 verses, chapter 21. The Lord kept his word and did for Sarah exactly what he had promised. She became pregnant, and she gave birth to a son for Abraham in his old age. This happened just at the time God had said it would. Remember, he said, a year from now, you're going to have a baby. This is exactly that time. And Abraham named their son Isaac. What did Isaac mean? Laughter. 8 days after Isaac was born, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. And Sarah declared, God has brought me laughter. All who hear about this will laugh with me. Who would have said to Abraham and Sarah would nurse a baby, yet I have given Abraham a son in his old age. Finally, after all these years, God now has blessed them with a son. How long has this been since he got his
90 years?
25 years before God finally came through? Okay, so the nice thing about this is for us to remember, there's a couple things. It's God's timing, not ours. God, if God says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. But we live in a society today that wants it here and now. We need things now.
I know these guys got 20 years. Everyone here is like freaking out if you're taking longer than 10 minutes.
Okay, if my Amazon package doesn't get here the same day it's supposed to, we start freaking out. You know? It's said it delivered. Where is it? Kind of deal. You know, but we need to remember God is in His own timing, and we need to be okay with that. Sometimes His answers are delayed for a purpose. He's like, "Are you trusting me?" And that's what this was all about. Was, "Are you trusting me, Abraham?" You know, so it really tested his faith. And it was perfect timing on all this, and it's very interesting, kind of how these next few things pan out. But I just was thinking, I was like, can you imagine waiting 25 years before receiving the blessing that God has told you about? I mean, how would you respond to that?
Thank you, God.
Shock.
What took you so long?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we definitely would be finally like, oh, thank you. You know, but during that 25 years, what in the world is your mind would be thinking about?
And don't let me forget the lessons that I learned.
Absolutely.
When did Abraham, how old was Abraham when he died? Do we know?
175, I think we'll get to that.
Be like opening a gift on Christmas morning going, this is what I asked you for, 25.
Right. The train I wanted already. I need a train.
By the way, he has additional kids past 100.
Past 100, yeah, absolutely. So very interesting story here. So let's move on, because this is a very weird interaction here, to some. So who would like to read 8 through 21? Not Vicky, because she's going to read the next section.
I'll read it. 8 to 21.
He's like, oh,
Yeah, I'll read it. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast in the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. So she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son for the slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. And this thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, be not be displeased because of the boy, because of your slave woman. Whenever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he was your offspring. So Abraham arose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water of the skin was gone, she put the child on one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite of a good way off, about a distance of a bow shot, where she said, let me not look on the death of the child. As she sat opposite of him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for the Lord has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with the water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up, and he lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. And he lived in the wilderness of Haran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt.
So what's going on here?
He's separating
Yeah.
these two nations, really.
We've talked about this. There's a theme of separation going on with God. There were two nations that were living together. You know what? They were already at war. Because one was making fun of or poking fun of, or there was some animosity between the two, all this kind of stuff. So much so that Sarah is like, I don't like this. It's even possible Hagar was even giving her a hard time, because Hagar was the elevated one before this, remember? Because she's the one that gave him a son. Well, now she just lost her place. And so now she's not feeling real good about it. And so God says, okay, time has come. We need to separate this. So Abraham, send her on her way with the boy. How do you think he felt?
Oh, it said it didn't like it.
Is he really a boy? Ishmael?
Yeah, he's about 13. I think he's about 13 years
13 or
old.
14,
Yeah,
right. That's what I thought.
he's a teenager at this point. He's
But
still a
then it
boy.
says 25 years between Hagar and Sarah giving birth, right? When not the promise. but-
Well, the promise was given, but
Right.
there were many years before Ishmael even came. So he was 13 years
Right.
at this point.
He was a teenager. This is why Hagar was so distraught.
Good point.
Touche.
So, I mean, God told Abraham, and you know, what's interesting to me, he's like, Abraham, you did this. You got to do this now. This was your sin, or you're kind of taking control that caused this issue. So go handle it. You know, so sometimes we have to eat a little crow whenever we do things that we shouldn't be doing with God, but he forces us to face it and do some hard stuff with it. You know, so think about that. So Abraham sends her on her way. Then what happens? Okay, they're out in the desert. You know, he at least gave her a little bit of water and a little bit of food, which I find is very interesting. That's all he gave her. Not any animals, not anything, not money, food and water. Then they go out to the desert. They run out. She thinks the boy's going to die. So she tells him, hey, you need to sit here. I'm going to come over here because I don't want to see you die. Kind of a deal, which I thought that was funny. And then who does God hear? God hears the boy, not Hagar, which I find very interesting. He's like, God heard the boy crying.
Because he's innocent. I mean, he hasn't, he's still innocent. He didn't ask for,
Yeah,
he
he had no control over the situation. Yeah, absolutely. He was innocent.
And Ryan, an interesting parallel is Ishmael was put under a bush, and Mom leaves and goes away. And Mary stays at the foot of the cross, and Jesus is on the tree.
Nice. Yeah, there's a lot of parallels with some of the stuff. And we're going to get to one here in just a second about the birth of Isaac that I didn't cover. So God calls out to Hagar. It says the angel of the Lord, but I believe this is God, because he says, I'm going to be the one to make this boy into a great nation. Who's this nation again? We covered it before.
Arabs?
The Arabs. Okay, not the Muslim. That's a religion, but this is the Arab nation. Okay, so that Arab nation is being split off. They're being sent off, and then after everything is good, one of the things that Hagar does and goes and finds a bride for her son. Where does she go? Egypt. Go back to her people to find someone.
That's right. Okay.
My grandparents were always trying to take me back to Syria. You need a nice girl.
Anything else in there that I didn't cover? Because this is, and then we get to another weird story with the Abimelech.
When God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water, so just miraculously.
Like, where'd that come from?
Right. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink.
Yeah. Where'd that well come from? She didn't see it before?
Nowhere.
Did it just happen to appear?
Yeah.
I think it was a miracle. God provided it and is providing for that nation too, which is very interesting. Okay? Because we like to point fingers, but we need to look at all of these nations how God views them. They're still chosen by Him for a purpose. Okay? All right, Vicki, this last section. 22 on.
At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, said to Abraham, God is with you in everything you do. Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me in the country where you are living as an alien the same kindness I have shown to you. Abraham said, I swear it. And Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. But Abimelech said, I don't know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I heard about it only today. So Abraham brought sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a treaty. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs from the flock. And Abimelech asked Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs you have set apart by themselves? He replied, accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I dug this well. So that place was called Beersheba, because the 2 men swore an oath there. After the treaty had been made at Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called upon the name of the Lord, the eternal God. And Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time.
Yeah, that's right, it was the next chapter. You're gonna read one more time.
Okay.
Names, sorry. The next chapter. Okay, so what happened here, what was going on? This, and just FYI, this sets the stage for chapter 26 of Genesis. Because Isaac is gonna encounter Abimelech at another time. And so this is kind of setting the stage of what was going on and what happened here. So what transpired during this little section?
Covenant.
A covenant. What covenant was done?
A treaty?
There definitely was a treaty that was going on between the two because, remember, Abraham has become a great nation. They're great people. Did you say something?
No, just a well of oath, that's what it is.
Yeah. And what was the whole argument about? What was going on here?
I think this guy doesn't want to attack Abraham because he sees God is with him.
He's afraid of Abraham, that's what it is.
Well, remember, Abimelech knows this God of Abraham. He's already had issues with him before, and he doesn't want to provoke him again. So he's coming to him going, hey guys, I want a treaty, I want some kind of something in writing here that we're okay. And then what was Abraham's response?
Accept these land?
Well, before that,
Reproved him.
well, there was an issue that was going on that Abraham needed fixing before they could do this treaty.
Well.
There was a well that Abraham had dug in the land. So, which is don't skip over that, because by him digging a well meant that he was staking basically a claim where he was going to be there for a while. Because that was a water source for his people, for his animals, all that stuff. So Abraham had dug this well, and now some of the servants of Abimelech had come over and were trying to basically take it from him. And Abimelech didn't know all this was going on, so Abraham goes, look, I'm okay with this, but we got to settle this issue first. He goes, I kind of want this area here. I want my well. And Abimelech's like, oh dude, you can have this thing.
He also says, don't hurt my family, right? He says, swear to me here that God, before God, that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants.
Yeah, but okay, but you better swear to me before God that you will not deal falsely with me.
And he swears it. And then he actually kind of pays him with some of these animals for that area. So that becomes his well. Now, I don't know if it's the real one, but if you go to Beersheba these days, there's actually a well that they say is Abraham's well. Don't know, but pretty interesting enough. Because that's where they need a lot of their water sources from. Okay.
I noticed that Abimelech was not necessarily the same one, but that was the name that was given to the ruler of wherever that people.
That area, that kind of like a king kind of a thing.
No, just the Melech. Melech is what his king means, like Pharaoh. But the name Abi is a real name.
So, it's speculation. I don't know, but it could be. I'm thinking it's kind of the same because it's kind of in the same time frame. But whatever the case is, the word got around to Abraham's God, and they revered him to some degree.
Didn't Abraham, basically accused him that, about the water that was seized by his people, his servants. And when he says, I just found out this today, I don't know anything about that. This is what the reply was, right?
Yeah.
I just heard about this today. What are you
It's
talking
the
about?
first time I've heard about this. Yeah, and then he takes care of it. And then they come to an agreement, and then they move on. They take care of whatever issues is in front of them, and then they move forward.
Okay.
Kind of reminds us about how
Yeah, before we move
before we
forward,
move, we need to go take care of something with our brothers
let's
before we
resolve this.
and do something. I think it's very kind of interesting. Anything else in that chapter before we move on? Well, Isaac's birth is very reminiscent of Jesus' birth. And as we move on to this next chapter, and I'm sure most of us have seen this, what transpires mirrors what happened at Calvary. Okay? But both of these births were promised. They had a long interval between the promises and the fulfillment. The announcement of the birth seemed impossible to both Sarah and Mary. So this is something only God can do. Both of them were named before their births. Both births were done at God's appointed time. Both births were miraculous, and both sons were obedient to their fathers even unto death. So that will be the end of what we see of this comparison. All right, chapter 22. And I think this chapter is very interesting, but I'll ask a question and because I'm curious what y'all say. So let's read this chapter. This is all one story and I hate to break it up. So can we read it all before we start talking about it? Are you all okay with that? Okay. So let's read it all. Vicki, I'll go through 14. Will you pick it up after that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith. Abraham, God called. Yes, he replied, here I am. Take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will show you. The next morning, Abraham got up early. He saddled up his donkey, took 2 of his servants with him, along with his son Isaac. Then he chopped wood for a fire for a burnt offering and set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day of their journey, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Stay here with the donkey, Abraham told the servants. The boy and I will travel a little farther. We will worship there, and then we will come right back. So Abraham placed the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders, while he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them walked on together, Isaac turned to Abraham and said, Father? He said, yes, my son, Abraham replied. We have the fire and the wood, the boy said. But where is the sheep for the burnt offering? God will provide a sheep for the burnt offering, my son. Abraham answered, and they both walked on together. When they arrived at the place where God had told him to go, Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood on it. Then he tied his son Isaac, laid him on the altar on top of the wood, and Abraham picked up the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. At that moment, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Yes, Abraham replied, here I am. Don't lay a hand on the boy. The angel said, do not hurt him in any way, for now I know that you truly fear God. You have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Go ahead, we can pick it up there.
Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. And to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because you And Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba. And Abraham stayed in Beersheba. Sometime later, Abraham was told, Milcah is also a mother. She has borne sons to your brother Nahor. Uz the firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel the father of Aram, Kesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jedlath, and Bethel. And Bethel became the father of Rebekah. Milcah bore these 8 sons to Abraham's brother Nahor. His concubine, whose name was Rimah, also had sons, Teba, Jaham, Tehash, and Makkah.
That's why I didn't want to read it.
I was thinking that.
Thanks. Okay. So what's the point of this story? What's the theme here? What's faith?
Trust.
Yeah. What I find interesting is that a lot of people tend to focus on the sacrifice part. That's not the main point of the story. The point of the story is Abraham's faith. Because regardless of what outcome happened, the boy was going to survive.
I kind of like how it's like a, in retrospect, or where we are in today's timeline, it's like a setup of prophecy. I think it's neat that that's supposed to mirror that in some way.
And let me tell you, those mirrors of prophecy of how things are going to be over time are all throughout the Torah. And God put things into motion specifically for that reason. This is why he wanted people to trust him, because he was setting the stage for things to come.
But the best part is, right, the part that, destroys that mirror is that no man can fill that spot of Jesus Christ. No human could do it.
Absolutely. Okay. So really the story is all about Abraham. It's not about Isaac. Isaac is definitely in there, and it's a big theme, okay? But this is really about Abraham. Because God was saying, look, I gave you the son. I can take him away. Do you trust me enough, though, with this? So how do you think Abraham felt in this?
I think, he got up early in the morning and said, he didn't hesitate.
Yeah.
I think, Hebrews tells us that Abraham thought, okay, he'll bring him back to life if need be. Abraham had been given promises from before, so it really is a story of faith. He just went and acted.
Abraham expected to come back with Isaac because he told his servants, we will worship and then we will come back.
Absolutely.
Actually,
However God wanted to do it, God was going to provide.
I think it shows how much Abraham has grown because he didn't trust God. He's saying, this is my sister. And then here he's like, yep, we're going.
No, absolutely.
He dressed up another little boy as Isaac.
This is my son over here. Do you think he told his wife, Sarah?
no, the next time that she dies, it means he might have not
Watch the show, the Bible.
I think he shared it, and that's what killed her.
It's funny though, some people think that. So that's why she died first, because she was so heartbroken there in this time, it put so much stress on her. And I'm like, I don't take that.
That's in the book of Yasher.
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
I'm not going there. It doesn't tell us that he told her. What we are told is he obeyed. But not only did he obey, he had to prepare. Because what I found funny is they're living in a desert, and he used their own wood to take with them. And where they were going, it was full of wood.
Well, also, and then he just looked up and, oh, look, there's a lamb.
Yeah.
Caught.
Yeah. And it just shows God's provision on all this stuff.
Still, you gotta think you've had thoughts running through his head. I don't know how this is gonna play out. I trust God in this, but
it's also a shadow.
there had to be thoughts going through his head. Sure. Gosh, I don't know how this is gonna
For
happen.
3 days, he had to travel with this knowledge of not knowing and what was going on.
How many days?
3.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting.
And the other thing is, God says that your only son, Isaac, is not recognized.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, he's
I mean,
Ishmael. Yeah, okay.
But on the same mountain, God gave his only son. So, God spared Abraham's seed, but he didn't spare
He didn't spare his own son.
Did he encounter people along the way after those 3 days,
After the 3 days? Or?
During, when he was traveling there.
Doesn't say.
And if you did, and somebody, hey, what's up? Where are you going? You're not gonna say, oh, you won't believe this.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm sure he encountered some people like walking. I doubt he really shared what was going on.
Like his wife, what would he gain from telling her that other than even more anguish?
Yeah, well, yeah. Then he probably spared her for that reason. He said, we got to go. The Lord told us we'll be back. Probably about as much as he told her, in my opinion.
I wonder what he was going through mentally, because that takes a lot of self-discipline to try to sacrifice your own son. Like, I mean.
Tears. A lot of tears.
Yeah.
Should I turn back? Should I not? How am I going to do this?
Or
For
even
3 days, Isaac was dead to him, basically.
Yeah.
For 3 days, he was dead.
Hey, Daddy,
where's
the sheep?
Yeah. And it is funny that they go to Moriah. This is not coincidental.
Talk about that later.
Moriah was in Jerusalem, was in that area of where that is. Okay? So God had a very specific plan. You're going to go very specifically to this place, and you're not going to deviate from what I'm going to tell you. Okay? And Abraham did it.
Abraham knew, though. Because I wonder if God like let him know in his heart of heart or whatever. Because chapter 8 says God will provide the lamb. He never once tells Isaac, "This is your job. This is what you're gonna do." I wonder if if it was just something he kept to himself that he knew it the whole time.
I think Abraham's faith was just that strong that however this is going to work, God's going to provide it. I don't fully know, but God's going to do it. Because I tend to believe that God did not share everything with him, because he didn't share everything with Moses either.
Well, he makes a big deal about it at the end. He says, "You trusted me. You passed this test. I tested your heart."
Yeah, there wouldn't be faith if he told him more about it,
Right.
in my opinion.
He didn't
Necessarily.
know more about it until he had the knife
The
ready
knife was
to
above
do
him.
it.
The knife was above him. So he had the wood. They traveled 3 days with 2 servants. Third day, he told the servants, "Hey, as y'all's already said, hey, we're going to move on from here." He probably didn't want anybody interfering with what was about to happen. He goes, "The boy and I are going to go alone. We will return." So they stay there. They go up to the place. From that point on, Isaac puts on the wood. He carries the exact instrument that is going to actually take his life. Now, the knife was going to help with that, but that's the burnt offering piece of it. Okay, so he was carrying it up there. Now, how old was Isaac?
Speculation said he was a young adult, not a teenage boy, but about 33.
It would not surprise me if he was 33 years old, or right around in that age.
Because Sarah dies at the age of 127, that puts it down like 26.
Yeah, because she was 95 and whatnot when she had died.
So somewhere around that area is what I think he was, because if Isaac is a picture of Jesus, I would think that he's a young man.
Couldn't help but think of The Chosen, that episode, right? Or if you all seen The Chosen, and they played that out, but in the piece, Isaac, the son was younger looking.
Yeah.
And I think that's just, isn't that generally what people think? Like, oh, he was a young boy.
Because there's
But
Well,
the
in
fact
the
that he
context of
wasn't.
their lifespan, 30
Yeah.
is really young if you get to live 800 or 900 years
That's
old.
interesting too.
That's
You know.
baby.
So the sheer act that he was he was a young man, he could have taken his old man out,
Right.
and he chose not to. He obeyed his father.
Now, that's a whole nother level there.
Okay, so that's something else to keep in mind, because
He did the Father's will.
he did the Father's will regardless of what that meant. What another picture of Jesus. He was the picture of Jesus.
I don't know.
So if Isaac is the picture of Jesus, who does Abraham represent?
Abraham.
God.
God the Father.
God the Father. Yeah, he's Abraham. No, but he's a picture of God the Father, which I think is interesting, because if we fast forward to Jesus on the cross, who do we say killed Jesus?
We did.
Or the Jews? A lot of people will say, well, the Jews killed Jesus. Well, that may have been what put him there.
He volunteered, doesn't mean without his permission, he said I can bring legions of
The angels
soldiers
to
and
come
he'll
stop
just
all this.
appear
He trusted.
He trusted his father. His father is the one that kind of did the sacrificing going on. He allowed this whole thing to take place. Now, he used people to get to that point to do this, because that is the culmination of this story of taking our sins on the cross. And that was God doing this whole thing. Okay, now, I know what the Jews did. I know what the Romans did. So I'm not saying that they weren't physically doing this. But spiritually, Jesus was doing exactly what God, his Father, was telling him to do.
Jesus himself said, "I lay down my life." He says, "I know." They didn't take it away from me. I laid it down. And I
Absolutely.
think it's interesting that in verse 9, it just says, next he tied him up. It didn't say he wrestled him to the ground and put the
Right.
cuffs on him.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Isaac submitted.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, that'd have been a
it's
weird
also
conversation.
interesting, sorry, go ahead.
What'd you say?
That'd have been a weird conversation. Okay, now I'm gonna tell
I
you.
don't
about-
think there was a lot of talking going on at that moment. Yeah, but you're right. Is this too tight, dude? Okay, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I was going to say a couple things. It's interesting that verse 6 says, "And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac, and they were both making this walk together," right? So I could just imagine what was going through Abraham's head, right? I mean, this is not a pleasant thing, and but he walked that walk with Isaac, just like God was walking that walk with Jesus. I also find it interesting that in verse 2 it says your only son, right? Well, he wasn't the only son. He wasn't even the firstborn. I just think that's interesting, and that comes up, in Hebrews and stuff like that. So, that's pretty interesting. And I'm also wondering, like what that conversation with God and Abraham looked like, because I would have to mull that over. Like I have to know for sure that God's talking to me, right? But he got up the next morning and went out to do this. I don't know. I wish I had some insight into what that actually looked like. Maybe he's just so used to hearing God's voice that there was not a doubt in his mind. I just haven't experienced that.
Yeah, no, I think he had that close relationship with the Lord. He knew exactly who was telling him to do and what he was commanded to do, and therefore he just got up and went. I don't think it was a very long conversation. I don't even think it was a conversation at all. It was a command by God, and he obeyed. Now, I'd love to sit down and talk with him at some point and go, what was going through your mind, dude, during this time?
What do they mean by your only son? I mean, when the angels said to him the second time, your son, your only son. I don't understand why he was.
Because it was his only son from Sarah. That was from the bloodline that God wanted this to all go through.
That makes sense.
Not Ishmael.
You probably read this, but it says, your only son Isaac, whom you love. So it's counting from Genesis 1:1. This is the first mention of love in the Bible. The first mention comes in context of love between father and son, connected with the idea of the sacrificial offering of the son.
Wow. And then what did God say to Jesus whenever he was being baptized? This is whom I love.
Right.
Okay, so we're seeing a lot of connections here with this.
And how many servants traveled with them?
Yeah, 2.
Just 2.
Yeah, now so let's get to some of the correlations between what happened with Isaac versus what happened with Jesus. Okay, they were both prophesied to come. They both had a miraculous birth, as we already said. They were both mocked by their own. Ishmael mocked, and then Jesus' people mocked him. They sacrificed as the only son. 3 days after being condemned, they rose from the altar alive, both of them. Isaac carried the wood. Jesus carried the wood. God was going to provide the sacrificial lamb. Jesus was the sacrificial lamb. Okay? And he provided it. They were offered on a hill in Moriah. Jesus was on that same hill. Okay? Isaac had 2 servants with him. Jesus had 2 thieves with him. But that's about the only correlation between the 2 that you can make of that. So it's debated whether or not that correlation is really there. But it is interesting that there were 2. They both obeyed their father completely. And lastly, they both asked their father a question before the death. So the correlation of what was going on here, and it was very important that Abraham followed this out, because God had this story in mind when it was happening.
And Isaac's question was, where's the sheep?
Where's
the lamb?
It's because he didn't understand what was going on. He was just doing what his father told him to do. Okay, so very interesting, and I'm going through this because this same reiteration of something in the future is also going to take place with Moses as he's taking the Israelites out. We hope, and I'll do this little disclaimer, it was when he strikes the rock for water. And then he just told a second time. And then that's what really gets Moses in a heap of trouble. And there's a reason behind that. We'll get into that when that time comes. Okay? So it's very important that they were doing exactly what God said, because God had a way bigger picture in mind than what he could have even thought.
They give us a little insight into this.
Yeah.
When they say God will provide for himself the lamb.
Absolutely. What was that?
I was just gonna say, I haven't really focused on Isaac's piece in this, but his trust in his father, Jesus' trust in God,
I mean, to not, because there's nothing about him arguing or fighting or, like you're saying, he's a young man. He really probably could have taken Abraham out.
Absolutely.
Like, no, this isn't happening. But also God, I mean, Isaac's trust in the promise of God to his father. Anyway, I hadn't really ever focused on that
Like he
piece, just thought about
respected his
that.
father, so. but
Absolutely.
yeah.
You know, and most people stop at the comparison there, but when's the next time we hear about Isaac after this moment?
When Rebecca shows up.
If he's coming for his bride. That's the very next time in chapter 25 that we hear from Isaac. So he's gone, and now he's coming for his bride that his father has been preparing for him to come. So the story doesn't end there. There's a lot happening in between that is the church age of what is happening right now. So this overarching picture is still occurring. Very cool.
How long was Isaac away before he came to get his bride?
Hey, I'm not real certain on that. We'll get into that. Yeah, and you're not going to know the time and date on that, so don't try to correlate.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was months or years or decades.
I don't think it was decades. I don't think it was that long. It could have been a 10 years maximum, but we still don't know. So anyway, so Abraham has a knife over him. He said, stop. He goes, man, great job, Abraham. Look, I'm going to provide the burnt offering. Here's the lamb over here. He's got his horns tied up in the thorns. I think it's interesting that it was thorns. Okay. And he says, and then he goes and starts then reiterates what the promise was that he gave to him. He goes, I'm going to do all these things here, for you. And so anyway, is there anything else in here that we want to cover?
I like that he says, I swear by myself, because there's something higher.
Yeah, absolutely not. That's good. Anything else? It's a great story. Don't miss what's really going on behind it, because a lot of people have problems with this. But again, the boy was never going to be sacrificed because that's not what God does. God abhors sacrificing children. So that was never the intention.
I mean, you can't translate it to today's time because there's too many real life situations where and God told me to do this, and it wasn't. It wasn't. But here it was, and when will it be again?
Yeah. So I tried to pull a couple things out here. What are some things that we can learn from this story?
Obedience. Obedience.
So God gives you a command.
Obedience. What was that, Dan?
I was just going to say, it's to me, another thing that's interesting about this is that I just don't know what was going through Moses' head or whoever, edited this or whatever, but you specifically have God the Father, right? Then you have specifically the angel of the Lord that stops him, that's watching him, and he tells him, right, that this angel says, you have not withheld your only son from me, right? This is the angel. This is a both, two parts of the Trinity right here, and it's, to me, that's amazing that it's written out like that. Anyway.
Yeah. And another name of God is given here. Jehovah Jireh, the God who provides. So all through these, we're only in chapter 22. We're seeing all these different names.
Our daughter's getting that.
Oh, no, that's good. Yeah, we're actually going to stop here shortly. So this is another aspect of God that we get to see. And these names are important because it does tell us the character of God. Okay? And one of the lessons that I got was, sometimes when the Lord gives us something, sometimes he asks us to give it back.
The other thing is to have such a close relationship, you hear him and know it's him.
Yeah, absolutely. And know that voice.
I think in fact, a big part of Lynn's about to preach one.
What's that? It's a big part. I think a big part of the story is that God likes to foreshadow and foretell what he's going to do.
Absolutely. Because it is riddled throughout Scripture. Okay? Anything else we'll probably end with just this chapter.
I just think it shows that he's in control. Even when we don't understand, we can't see, we just can't grasp the mind of God. He's in control.
Yeah, and we need to be okay with that.
And that's the lesson of faith.
Yeah. However, I mean, think about what's going on in this world these days. It's not good. Is God still in control of it?
Yes.
So why do we worry about it? I mean, it hurts, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say it's unnerving, okay? But we are not to fear, we're not to be worried about it. That's not from God. He's in control of all situations. No matter what happens.
I think too, even in the midst of that, it shows his love for us.
Absolutely.
And he understood what Abraham was going through. I mean, you know, how hard that must have been for him. And just his love for Abraham and Isaac.
Yeah.
In that.
Well, and think of this too. This whole picture is showing his love for us because this was on his mind way back in that time. We were on his mind then, and that he was already making the way for the sacrifice.
Even before that.
Absolutely. I mean, it was done before creation. So, prayer requests.